Hello and welcome to our quick little demo video showing the new Ethos integration features within Terminalfour. These features were introduced in January 2021 and really make it a lot easier to integrate with Ethos. It really taking a low-code approach to integrate with Ethos so that you can quickly pull out data without needing to write custom code or anything like that. So just hopefully this is really helpful. If you have any questions, we would love your feedback on it, given you guys are the experts on Ethos. So any feedback would be really very much appreciated. So this feature is based on an existing feature called our Enterprise Content Syncer, which allows you to pull in data from one or many sources and reuse them on things like websites, portals, or on mobile apps. So it's very, very flexible. So in this particular example here, I'm going to show you just a very straightforward program finder within a university. And in this case, we are just going to do a search here for maybe undergraduate programs in the science area. It gives you the listing. You might want to save some of these. You might want to compare them, come back to them later, and so on. Typically, though, for these sort of course search or program finders, this data will actually come from many places. Some of it could come from student information systems, such as Banner. It could come in from a curriculum management system. It could, and most likely will have a certain marketing influence over it, so that the marketing people might, say, upload photographs, nicely written copy, and these are sort of fields that typically wouldn't be in your student information system. So the whole idea here is that obviously when you're creating a course page on a website, the information comes from a number of sources, and often that data is actually available within Ellucian products. So what we've done is we've created a more out-of-the-box way of pulling in data, any data in fact, from Ellucian Ethos. And really there's no restriction once the data is available. I guess it could bring in really any data at all, like lists of items within Ellucian Ethos, and even things to populate portal environments for students. The key benefit of the Enterprise Content Syncer feature that we have implemented is it's not just doing live integration directly into Ethos, which could potentially flood Ethos with loads of requests. If, for example, there was a denial of service attack on a website, we take that in, we cache it in a way you can add content to it, but none of the web traffic that hits any of that data will ever reach Ellucian Ethos. But there's really a massive potential for this, because it really means any data within Ellucian Ethos can be reused in a fairly straightforward way. So really, in practice, probably the biggest use cases around searching and listing programs, degrees, and maybe pulling information in for portals for students. So I'm going to go over and actually show you a little bit more detail on how all of this works. So just to explain how the external content syncer works in practice, within the Terminalfour product, you would create up what's called a content type, and a content type would typically be something like, how you want the information to be represented online. So it could be like course descriptions or degree descriptions, or in the case of a people finder, what are the fields of information that you want to have filled in. So in the case of, say, course information, some of that information, as I mentioned, is going to come from marketing, and some of it might come from curriculum management systems, and some others might come from Ellucian Ethos products. So what we do is you'll see in a moment, we'll set up a data source, and that will connect up to those different places where that data comes from. And that could be, for example, a database. It could come from web services, and also we actually even support sort of legacy CSV files if people have data in those sort of formats. So here what happens is we basically say what fields of this content type actually are populated from where. So in the example we're going to see, it's actually linking off to Ethos to pull in this data for particular fields. What we're doing it, I suppose what's unique about this big feature improvement here is it's doing it in a low code way. You actually don't need to do any web services programming, anything like that. It handles all the security and distribution of the content and reuse. Once the content is within the Terminalfour system or synchronized into the Terminalfour system, it can be reused anywhere. So it can be pushed out to websites, even little micro web services feeds. For example, if someone wanted to provide a public API of, say, courses or something like that, it can even be pushed out into like course catalogs, into like PDF publications, or into other formats as well. But ultimately, this content can be completely reused. Any changes are synchronized. So any changes, say, for example, to the data through an Ellucian product, that will automatically, usually on a timed basis, synchronize to everywhere it's used. But ultimately, any of this data could be used across websites, portals, mobile apps. And the whole idea is that the data's in one source and you're reusing it as much as possible, but it handles all the security. You can even put workflows on it so that, when a new degree is added, that maybe someone from marketing is flagged, and they can put in nice photography and nice student stories and things like that. So jumping actually into the product, you'll see here the Terminalfour platform. The first thing we do is we set up a data source. You can have as many data sources as you like. These can be often things like databases. Ethos will be another data source, but really the most commonly used ones are databases and web services endpoints. In the case of Ellucian Ethos, you can see here we're setting up a test Ethos connection. The username is redundant, but you would put in then your API token, and then you'll see there that you have things like your URL for the Ellucian Ethos endpoint there. So once you set up a data source, you'll typically set these sometimes up a number of these in parallel as well if you're merging together a lot of data. So we're going to save this over here, and you'll see here there's a little feature where you can actually then test the connection to make sure that it's reaching the Ethos endpoint correctly. So that's how we've set up the data source. We're telling it where to potentially a user within the platform can pull information from. I'm just going to go over to the actual external content syncer feature here, which I have here in another tab. So here you're going to see the configuration screen for the external content syncer. There's quite a lot of options here on this screen, but one thing you'll see at the bottom is the web services query. And this connects up with the data source that you've selected. What it means is that basically we've picked here from the test Ethos data source. So we just want to make sure we're pointing to the right place. Like you could have a production data source and maybe a test data source. But the key one here is the web services query, and you can use whatever, that can be as complicated as you want it to be. And it goes back to there you have the URL where it's pointing to where the normal endpoint would be. So you're just really putting the last part of the web services query there. And there's a lot of other configuration options there, but ultimately what we're doing is we're pointing to where in the API you want to pull data. In the case there from, say, academic programs, and there we're limiting it to 10 results. So there's a lot of options here on the screen, as you can see, and it's typically saying where the content's coming into, where it's going to be published to, what languages it's going to be pushed out to, what channels, like to a mobile app or maybe to like a website, and so on. So there's a lot of flexibility here. So really this part here, I suppose, with the web services query, this can be very flexible. So you basically can say where you want the endpoint, but actually you can also send through endpoint properties. So in this case, for example, we're using version 15 of Ethos. So for example, maybe for a particular use case for courses, we want to pull in some courses data, but we actually want to use, say, version 16. So all we do is we say we want to pull in data from the courses API and version 16, and you just send these through. The whole idea is that someone who knows the data will actually configure these endpoints up within our system, basically connecting it to the Ellucian Ethos endpoints, but also saying what parts of Ethos are people allowed reuse or connect to, and also what versions are they allowed use as well. So in this particular case, we're going to bring in some academic programs data into Terminalfour, which then could be reused like we showed at the very start, on like course catalog search or things like that, or maybe program descriptions you can brought in. So what we're going to do is there's the API, there's the Ellucian documentation there on screen. That can be as sophisticated a model as as whatever, depends on what people's data. So once we connect it through, what ends up happening is we return it in quite a straightforward, like a flatter version of it. And what we're able to do is see those fields there on the right hand side, on the left hand side. The fields on the left hand side are the fields in the Terminalfour system. Now we've given them names here just for test purposes, but you would typically give those more human names. On the right hand side, that's the fields that you bring in from Ellucian Ethos. So it's basically listing the fields available within Ethos. And there, for example, you could also use the ID to cross-link data and do relationships on the Terminalfour side. So you might say, well, for example, a course has a number of particular modules and stuff like that as well. So basically this example data is basically showing you any of the fields that you're allowed to use, and it gives you a little bit of notation there in red, and then you basically drop those in to map them together with human named fields within Terminalfour, so that when you synchronize all the content in, and this is just some data brought into the system, when you go into it, some test data, you can see all the different fields have been synchronized. Now typically on the left hand side are the fields like where it says first, second, third, fourth. They would like be the human names of what that field should contain. But basically what this allows you to do is basically map over any data at all from Ellucian Ethos into content within Terminalfour, and then reuse that content. So in this case, for example, the test program is automatically populated from Ethos. But you saw there's actually very little coding or anything involved. It's really about dropping field names in, and it's really handy from that point of view. Anyway, look, if you have any questions, we'd really love your feedback. I mean, basically the whole idea is to make it a very easy way to reuse data within Ellucian Ethos without really needing to know much code at all. I know we talked a bit about data and structures and all about that, but really you're just getting lists of fields of data that you want to reuse from Ethos, and you can very quickly figure out where that's to go, when it's to synchronize, where it's to be pushed out to. Anyway, we'd love your feedback, your thoughts, ideas. Are we doing something that's not quite right? Just let us know. Thank you very much.